Let's have a talk, let's have a chat, talking about a little this and that. Hello and welcome to This and That. I am your host, Mary Easterling. We are continuing on Bob Newman's The Red Flag series. The past two episodes are on talking about thisandthat.wordpress.com. Go to the podcast link and click on Bob Newman's Red Flag series. You can also find the written portions on our blog. Each blog contains a link that'll take you to the audio, which opens in another window so you can listen while you look. In our last episode, we talked about man versus man. In our first episode, we talked about deception. There's a pattern following here. So as we are continuing on our layer cake of flags, because in Bob Newman's Storm series, the mention of flags like red flags, like hurricane flags, for the storm watch, the storm warning, and now the storm's here, because there is no third flag. There's ever only always two. Today we are talking about red flags, Pestilence Reborn. Matthew 24:9 says, "Then they will hand you over to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name." I keep saying this. These things were written in the 90s to early 2000s. And so you get these references. If you go Google the references, you start to get an idea when he was writing. Because at that time, this was the thing that was going on. I will interject stuff to try and bring it more relevant to where we are in 2025. A year ago, Bob writes, a year ago, a movie called, quote-unquote, Outbreak came out, and the character Ebola nearly stole the show, literally. There are many people who say it was just a movie, quote-unquote, it can't happen here. That is one face of the spirit of deception. On the other hand, there are people I know who dread going into any public area for fear of, quote-unquote, contamination. That is the big brother to deception. The spirit of fear moves freely while the spirit of deception slinks in the shadows. Let me say that again. The spirit of fear moves freely while the spirit of deception slinks in the shadows. That's the way it has been for forever. And that's the way it is now. It can't happen here. That's the deception. Disease and pandemic can happen anywhere, and did in 2020. Remember 2020? A perfect year for hindsight in 2025. We are now vax happy because the pharmaceutical industry, which is just another kingdom, discovered a new quote-unquote toy, the vax, like the vape. But vaccines do not stop disease. They simply teach the body how to better cope with the disease until it mutates beyond that vaccine batch type. Now, another round at the bar, boys, is sung, and the new and better vax is rolled out like the proverbial quote-unquote barrel. But we're not monkeys, and we're not laughing. What was at first free is now starting to cost. Add to this all the new meds, like, if it's COVID, Paxlovid. The newest player is the bird flu that has hit us hominids in the sick zone, but has hit harder in the wallet. Call it the new war, the egg war. Eggs on the dark web. Eggs stolen by the cartload. Eggs? Chicken is next. Because they killed all the layers, now they have to pull into the laying production from some of the meat birds, maybe. Still, usually the old gallinas get the axe, and you eat them once the eggs are starting to dwindle. But wait, we killed off a bunch, didn't we? So from egg wars to bird wars? Chicken chicken nuggets on the dark web? Will the nuggets soon be the price of gold? Nobody knows. Bob writes, while I have mentioned that our modern high-tech instantaneous knowledge media is a major tool of deception, it is a standard weapon in the arsenal of the spirit of fear. The spirits of fear and deception move hand in hand and destroying and crippling the lives of people by twisting knowledge to their use. Twisting knowledge to their use. Point of proof. Now, before I make mention, remember when this is being written. This is an indicator. Go Google this and you'll find out when he was writing. Bob writes, point of proof. Mad cow disease, quote unquote. I insert the new and improved bird flu and the quote unquote egg war that this has spawned. Bob writes, while in the category of pestilence, it will also fit the category of famine. Quote unquote mad cow disease is a name given to a disease called, and he doesn't tell us what it's called, so I looked it up. It's called bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE. It's a variant of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, VCJD, which can be found in humans. It's an encephalopathy. In other words, it'll melt your brain, sort of, kind of, maybe. Bob writes, it is a real disease that can affect man. Like many diseases, has been used by the spirit of fear far beyond its actual spread. In the nation of England, people have this horrible, spectacular disease, and it kills slowly and painfully. Yet how many out of the 60-plus million Great Britain have it or have died from it? Numbers are hard to find. Again, he doesn't mention what it is. I kind of Googled something called Legionnaire's disease. Bob writes, some people say that disease itself warrants our attention. Quote unquote, people need this information, shouts the united voices of fear and deception. So, lo and behold, Oprah puts together a program to inform us about, quote unquote, mad cow disease. Within the hour, cattle futures and the whole futures market drops. The Dow Jones, as quote unquote bullish as it wants to be, flattens. I add, I wonder who put out the program on the new bird flu, but it is all over the news. How is poultry, especially the nuggets and futures, on the same doing? But eggs, were they truly a publicly traded commodity? Did the quote-unquote bull get flattened again? Bob writes, throughout the nation, local news channels have polls to quote-unquote measure public opinion. 23 minutes after her program ended, the local affiliate had a local number for viewers to call to express their opinion. Then they had the gall to announce finding of their quote-unquote poll would be given before the end of the broadcast. Wait. Full stop. The local news affiliate might have been CBS or ABC. Remember, Mr. Neumann at this time lived in South Florida, South Florida, below Miami, South Florida, or in Miami, South Florida. Yeah. And then that same news broadcast said they'd announce their polls before the end of the broadcast. We're watching the news. How many of us are actually phoning our opinions in or going on our computers at this? We're watching the news. They've got some sort of information already ready, vetted, and ready to go. They're going to throw a number at you, baby. Bet on it. By the way, folks, if my softer voices have been a little too soft, yeah, I am finding I'm having some trouble with controlling how my miking is. So if my loud voice gets a little too loud, you turn down your volume. But I'll tell you what, you get a hard time turning it up when I get too quiet. Bob writes, to paraphrase Shakespeare's tragic hero Hamlet, quote unquote, something smells very fishy on your video box. A major lesson from the School of Hard Knocks, quote, if it looks like a setup, sounds like a setup, smells like a setup, quit calling it a lousy duck, unquote. Throughout history, the ideal of a quote-unquote plague has haunted the dreams of mankind. As we modern thinkers get sidetracked by the media-hyped quote-unquote bugs, we lose sight of the more real threats. Old nightmares are coming back to life, and the media is strangely silent. I add, shall we forget how coronavirus ripped through the USA? How it ripped through the world? We vaxxed it to death, right? Or did we simply, quote-unquote, herd immunize it into a merger with the local cold and flu bugs of the year? Or has it? Seems it has not been in the news this year in the winters. I'm talking 2024, the end of 2024, when the cold started hitting, and the beginning of 2025. I'm in February. There's still cold all up in the north. Have you heard it on the news? Has it been on the news? Flus have been on the news. Yeah, well, because it's been cold, folks. Cold and flu season. Hello. Was it too cold for that to surface this year? Or did something else take its place? Or was the command given to the media watchdogs, shh, enough said about that for now. Bobby Kennedy's coming in. He don't like the vax. Stop talking about it. He doesn't want us to know what he's doing. Ooh, that's going to be something else to watch. This guy, our new head of the CDC, he's interesting. Buckle up, folks. It's going to be a bumpy ride, she said. Bob writes, quote-unquote, AIDS is still around, but it doesn't get our attention as easily or as sharply as it once did. Just call it, quote-unquote, the boy who cried wolf syndrome. To which I add, Cabenuva. What are some of the other ones? Think about it. Google it. We've got new options. We can keep you below the detectable level so you can't pass it on during sex. What about blood transfusions? Does it work for those? Bob writes, most people are definitely afraid of quote-unquote AIDS, yet few really know how it works or how extensive it is worldwide. As media selects what and how it does hype, we see the working of the kingdom of darkness. Few Americans know the quote-unquote facts because few desire to look for them. Most Americans only know what the media gives them. Few remember what they see, hear, or read. Will Rogers once said, quote, I only know what I read in the newspaper, unquote. That prophecy is now being fulfilled. Like I said, they did the science, but how well is it working? Why is it not in the news? Because it's in the marketing. Hey, it's in the marketing now. It's a once-a-day pill. Or no. This is a go to the place and get your shot, and then you don't have to come in for a few months. This is for all the homeless people who are sicker than dogs out there with disease. The junkies that are homeless, that are also LGBTQIA++, and then some, that are still in their lifestyle, on the streets, where they can't get or keep their little golden pill. So they have to find a way to keep the memory of when they need to go and get the shot, so they can stay undetectable. I still ask you, they give blood. They do things to make money. Their dirty blood that's now got something in it. Oh, and what is that? For PrEP. antibiotic stuff, pre-AIDS drug, so that the guy who you're going to have sex with is loaded with the ability to fight off the disease you have while you're busy staying undetectable. Oh. See, they've been doing the science, so now they think we've got this all under control. Yup. Bob writes, quote-unquote, mad cow disease is this year's quote-unquote celebrated. I write, the new bird flu is this year's quote-unquote celebrated. Bob writes, last year it was Ebola. The year before it was E. coli. They join all the past celebrities, quote-unquote AIDS, quote-unquote Legionnaire's disease, Agent Orange, polio, influenza. Oh, I almost forgot, quote-unquote flesh-eating disease, and quote-unquote Junta virus. Oh, that'll take you back. That will take you back a few years. Junta virus, Bob writes, all seem to have their day in the sun. Andy Warhol once said, everyone will have their quote-unquote 15 minutes in the spotlight of world attention. That may be because most new issues are kept in 5-minute segments. So each gets its 15 minutes in 3 sections. Remember this. The first section is the quote-unquote shock. The point of first mention or contact. Sudden attack of a strange new quote-unquote bug. Signs and symptoms that look more like movie trailers. Views of victims in their worst-case scenes. Then comes the second section, where we are overwhelmed by the comments, by people in anguish and despair. After every thread of emotion is plucked, then they go on to the next story. Finally, the third section is the quote-unquote panic button. The bug is built up and expanded. The thrust to all humanity has been quote-unquote hidden. But now you quote-unquote need to be told everything for your own good. After which comes the quiet. I write, the quiet is the moment you really need to be quote-unquote listening to the quote-unquote still small voice. They hyped you, scared you, or maybe for once actually informed you. With COVID, the whole alone together idea was born. Isolation, self-quarantine, gaps in line, masks, vaccines that actually did do harm in patients with heart problems. But there was a die-off, or was there? What were the real facts? Also, which strain did any one person get? Now, before I put this information out, I didn't hear this from the news source. I heard this from 2 nurses while I was sitting outside a hospital waiting to be able to talk to somebody as my mother's caregiver because she had another one of her urinary tract infection issues. And they wouldn't let me in because COVID. So I'm sitting out there, and I'm listening to all this. And one nurse is talking to another about what's happening in the hospital. There was one variant that destroyed the red blood cell's ability to carry oxygen. You would breathe, but the blood ox just tanked, and you died on a ventilator because the red blood cells were stripped of their ability to carry oxygen. So you could inhale, exhale, but you weren't actually getting any air in your blood. Bob writes, in the last 5 years, the World Health Organization and Center for Disease Control have quietly stated quote-unquote facts. Media does not hype facts. It creates causes. So little has reached the North American public about old diseases returning. Quote-unquote mad cow disease may have killed hundreds of people, and quote-unquote many more are affected. In the late 1990s, hundreds of thousands continued to die from such quote-unquote cured diseases as cholera, diphtheria, and typhus. Oh, that's all third world, right? How sanitary do you think the homeless populations are? How about our newest threat, the illegal immigrants in their little cities in their little hovels, in their little all over the sidewalks. Oh, how are they doing? And oh, by the way, what did they contract while they were on their way to our border? hmm Bob writes, in isolated areas, bubonic plague has quote unquote broken out, but has been contained so far. Millions and tens of millions have died from tuberculosis, malaria, and malnutrition. Tens of hundreds of millions will die from the opportunistic diseases that are associated with the end stages of HIV infection, otherwise called AIDS. Stop. Not so fast. Now that we have all these new drugs, HIV is being controlled. Or is it? Bob writes, you may wonder why I have listed quote-unquote malnutrition as a pawn of the entity called the quote-unquote pestilence. Since earliest of times, man's crops and cattle have been threatened by their own quote-unquote bugs. Today, 3 states have had to destroy their wheat crops because of carnal bunt, also known as wheat smut. Have you heard much about that? The Department of Agriculture is very concerned. Last year, the nation's corn crop was compromised by corn smut. That is why the price of a bushel of feed corn is the highest in history. Likewise, the cost of poultry and meat will continue to rise. Historically, when crops are destroyed or livestock dies, people starve. Famine and pestilence have marched hand in hand across the pages of history, usually following the footsteps of war. More people have died from starvation and disease following the battle than were usually killed in the battle. Children suffering from malnutrition die easily from diseases that we would think of as minor. Likewise, the chronic disease victims and the elderly. The quote, New Age One World, unquote, crowd wants 2 things. First, to go back to the quote-unquote old ways of the ancient past. Secondly, they desire to quote-unquote control the planet's population at about 5 million. 500,000,000 people. Simple arithmetic tells us around 5 billion plus people are unnecessary and need to quote-unquote go. Lucky for them, the quote-unquote old ways have a method of population control that is most efficient. War, quote-unquote, pestilence, quote-unquote, and famine, quote-unquote. 3 of the 4 horsemen of Revelation sealed judgments have proven both quick and effective. All 4 horsemen of the apocalypse seem to be mounted and moving today. Full stop. This is the late 90s. All 4 horsemen of the apocalypse seem to be mounted and moving today. If they are, all those seals have gone pop, 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 pop. As of 2024, I got a news flash from on high that at least 2 of them were open. Number 1, who is the deluding spirit, the one that makes us believe a lie. And then number 2, go take a wild guess what that one might be. Go read the book for yourself. That's the next movie. Oh, wait, Left Behind series. Why, we've already done that. Dang it. Bob writes, will we see them in time to warn the unknowable, the unsuspecting, the quote-unquote careless lives in the aisles? Only time will tell. He writes, I am, quote-unquote, Samuel. I was called to be a watchman over 6 years ago. This is just one way to give out the, quote-unquote, cry of warning. If you have read any or all of what is available on this quote-unquote site, then I have done all that has been required of me. It's now up to you to think about and to decide how to proceed on with your life. It's yours to choose. May the most holy Spirit of my Lord, the God of Israel, give you wisdom, strength, and peace. He closes this Samuel. Shmuel, heard of God. I like to say it, hearing God. He says his name is Samuel because Shmuel is one of the names, the nicknames that the king, the captain, gave him. I'm sitting here in 2025 reading this off into audio, putting this up on my blog with this and that. Am I a watchman? Nah. I'm just some old coot in Florida, sounding off, making noise. Hype! Hype, 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 hype. That was then. Have you paid any attention to what's going on right now? The one world order people, we've got a bunch of people in there that are so far from one world order, they want to be this nation isolated, close the borders, purge the government of all the spurious, useless offices like Environmental Protection Agency, the Consumer Protection Agency, some other agencies. Start watching the agencies that are closing, folks, because they were your way to plug into the federal government to get redress when stuff didn't go so nicely. You know, when the bait and switches started happening hard, fast, and continuously, when the slipshod and the companies were like, well, we don't care. So you died. Well, how come you suing us now? Okay, so your mother died, your father died, your baby died. So what? What you gonna do about it, sugar doodle? You got nobody to complain to now, have you? Oh yeah! POTUS little sidekick, Le Doge, closed all those agencies. Put all those people on the bread line. You know what they're looking for? A new way to get bread. Bread is an old term for money. Guess what all those overqualified people are doing? Out competing honest qualified people, honest job applicants for the same jobs. And we've got tariffs. This guy's putting tariffs on everything, and he's threatening to tariff all the nations that are tariffing us. That's a new war, the tariff wars. Every nation that puts tariffs on its imports is going to raise the local prices for everything the imports serve, whether it's pieces, parts to your widget gadget or computer or cell phone, to your supermarket, to your car, to your boat, to the appliances in your house. Meanwhile, the insurance companies are overwhelmed. They've lost the bet. They're having to pay out handsomely. They're going under. They're folding one right after the other. They're pulling policies. They won't insure you. So now when the acts of God, which are coming hard, fast, and continuously these days, start slamming through, guess what? Homelessness. And with it comes mo disease, mo pestilence. I said acts of God. Yes, I'm going to go on audio as stating this. Unbelievably, God is behind our POTUS. And he might actually be behind our POTUS' Doge. Why? He's not happy, by the way, because somebody made the President of the United States their fixer instead of making God their fixer for all the things in their life. POTUS is God. Yes, and this POTUS knows it. He says he's a Christian. So does the Doge. They're all saying they're Christians. All of a sudden, everybody's a Christian. Hey, no, we're all Christians. It's a big, happy family. Oh, by the way, here's one term. Look up the term, the family. It's a cult. It's a subsect of Christendom. Look up their ideologies and their theology. See, understanding how the scriptures are matters as well as the source. If your theology is warped, your Christianity is warped. Anything that is warped is serving the devil. And that's a wrap for this episode of This and That. In our next episode, we will be talking about red flags, kingdom versus kingdom. So until then...